difficulties. We had a little problem with the laptop here in Jacksonville, but I do appreciate you taking some time out this afternoon to talk about some of the issues in 2022. There's a lot to talk about. And what I thought I would do to start the year off is kind of like try to make some predictions. And I think some of these things are kind of written in stone and not really going down on a limb making predictions, but I think you'll agree that these things are happening. And so what I'm going to do is talk about some of the things that I think are going to happen in 2022 and then how they impact builders risk insurance and what we can do as agents to try to mitigate this risk. And these are kind of trends that we've seen develop over the last number of months. And what we'll do is run through this pretty quickly and then open it up for questions at the end. So once again, Jeff Benson coming to you from Jacksonville, Florida. Really appreciate you taking out the time today. So critical risks to prepare for in 2022. Let's jump right into this. Next screen. Increased storm severity. This is kind of like, we could talk about it all day long, but it seems to be that year after year, we're starting to see, more tropical storms, more convective storms, and the convective storm area in the Midwest is growing. It's not just the Midwest anymore. We even saw, a giant cold snap in Texas last year that did a lot of damage, a lot of insured damage. Some of the tropical storms, like Ida, for example, kind of blew up right before it hit, made landfall in Louisiana, and then caused damage all the way up into New York, flooding. So we have floods. And then we also have the wildfires out west and the northwest and southwest. These things I think are going to be reoccurring in 2022. So then what can we do as agents to prepare our insureds, the builders, the developers, the individuals building houses for these events? And we've learned a lot in the last number of years. So the first thing is really preparation before the storm, not waiting until May or June to start thinking about tropical season. We need to think about it now. So what can we do? So we can do things like, let's make sure that insurance to value is in place, so we have the right coverage. Let's make sure our insureds understand what a mandatory wind or flood deductible is. Let's make sure our insureds know how the risk can change based on occupancy, based on renovations and remodeling. All these things can change the risk characteristics, and we want to try to avoid uncovered claims. That's the bottom line. We're starting to see more and more people building homes further away from cities. So that means it's further away from fire departments and water supplies. So you're starting to see more of those exposures. And this is all leading to the fact that it's going to be harder and harder to place these risks as time goes on, because as the carriers have more and more claims, they get a little nervous about these things. And first step is to raise the rates, and then the next step is to stop writing the business altogether. So what can we do? Let's go to the next slide. So this is the thing we hear about a lot, and everybody throws it around, but the supply chain effect on building materials. And I have some examples for you, and it's pretty interesting. So we know this has increased the cost of construction. The fact that there's less materials out there, the demand for homes is still there, the demand for remodeling is still there. In fact, it's even growing. So as demand goes up and the supply goes down, we don't have to be an economist to understand that this has an effect on the cost of construction. So things are more expensive to build. Next thing it does, and this affects builders' risk directly, is the length of the construction project. If it used to take 7, 8, or 9 months to build that, $600,000 or $700,000 home, it's now taking 11 or 12 months. So you can do the math on that. So you have more at risk for a longer period of time, and you have to prepare for this. You have to make sure the builders understand that. And like I said, single-family housing is up. I'm going to show you some numbers in a few slides. And there's more homes being built now than there has been in years, and that's projected to continue in 2022. And I said this about occupancy clause because this is a key coverage component, or actually a limitation of builders risk. We have situations where people are moving into incomplete homes, and maybe the builder thinks he has coverage, but once that building becomes occupied, he might not have coverage. So you need to understand the form that you're selling because there's not one standardized builder's risk form. They're all different. So the occupancy clause is the key to understanding this. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. The supply chain effect on building materials. So I'm not going to read all these three bullets to you, but basically, more and more builders are seeing a delay in how long it takes to build something. And the reason they're seeing that delay, number one reason is building materials. There's situations where builders can't get garage doors or builders can't get appliances. I've heard of builders not being able to get windows or light fixtures. And so, it delays the closing of the home. The home sits there, it has more exposure to it. So that's one thing. The other thing is maybe the family moves in. I've heard of families moving in without garage doors. So that's all fine and good, but you got to make sure that your builder's risk is still going to respond to a claim on that house. And as I said earlier, the number of homes continues to grow. They're building more than they have been. November 2021 was the highest level since 2007. And you can see that the number of homes grew month over month from October to November. And these things are usually like about 30 days, but December is probably going to be strong. And the projections for 2022 are still very, very healthy housing market. Next slide. I've been talking to a lot of builders, and there is definitely a shortage of skilled labor. Could be COVID related, could be the fact that demand is high, so there's just a lot of business out there and not enough skilled labor. And what does that do? First thing is you have to be as a builder, you have to maintain the quality of the products you're building, and it's hard to do if you don't have skilled labor. It obviously has a major impact on the length of time it takes to build something. If you can't get the electrician or the plumber in there, it delays the completion of the home, and we've already talked about that a little bit. And the term of the policy is critical. We run into this every day where an agent calls and they said, well, the home's 75% done, but the carrier wants off of it now. They don't want to be on it anymore. So I guess what I'm saying is you need to negotiate these terms when you first write this to make sure you have a market that's going to stay with you. That's critical. Next slide. Inflation. This is our favorite thing now. So inflation has a major impact on builders' risk. Number one is home prices are increasing. The average value of a single-family detached home in the United States now is over $400,000. A few years ago, it was $250,000. Now it's $400,000, and it continues to go up. So you have to make sure you have adequate insurance to value. It's relatively easy on the ground-up new construction projects. What I tell agents all the time is sit down with your builders and say, selling price minus land. If we write the coverage for that, you're going to be fully covered. So that's the labor, the materials, the overhead, the soft costs, everything that goes into building the house is covered on the form, at least is in our form in our program. And so and the profit even when they sell it. So if they do selling price minus land, we're going to guarantee insurance to value. It gets a little tricky when you have renovation projects, especially when you have existing structure coverage plus renovations. I'm going to walk you through that in a minute. But we need to understand certain basic terms in property insurance, actual cash value, replacement cost, stated value, etc. To make it pretty simple, replacement cost minus depreciation equals actual cash value. And the builder's risk, replacement cost is what I described earlier on the ground up new. It's what are you building? What's it cost to build the project? All in, all the expenses. That's replacement cost. When you have an existing structure, you're forced to understand what depreciation is. And it does vary by parts of the country. It varies by the construction type, being frame, masonry, non-combustible, etc. So they do depreciate at different rates. But you need to make sure that you have adequate coverage on that existing structure. And you do that in the beginning, that you don't wait till the very end until there's a claim. You do that when you write the coverage. Sit down with the insured, talk to your underwriters, make sure you have proper insurance to value. I cannot tell you how important that is when there's a claim. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. This is interesting. So inflation through 3 quarters of 2021 was at 18.6%. That's unbelievably high. That's how fast housing is increasing. They did see a little bit drop in that in the 4th quarter of last year to 16%, but that's still almost unheard of for housing prices to go up that much. It's kind of funny too. When we all think about our houses and we get excited, we think our house is worth a lot more than it used to be. But then we have to remind ourselves, well, the house we move into is going to be more expensive to buy too. That's kind of the pitfall of inflation. The reason I talk about inflation is builders understand this. They know these expenses are going up. They're going to pass them on to the people they're building the houses for. We have to make sure on a builder's risk standpoint that we have proper insurance to value. So just stay on top of that. I cannot stress that enough. Next slide. So over 97% of all single-family homes in the United States, ground up new, are frame construction. And we all know what frame construction does. It's the most exposed to the elements. We have a lot of issues with frame. It burns down, the wind blows it, the flood affects it. It's just one of those materials. So what we're going to start seeing is we've seen some lumber shortages. They come and go. Right now it's not too bad, but it was bad earlier in 2021. You're going to see scarce capacity of the lumber. You're also going to see scarce capacity of underwriting carriers that want to write frame construction. We're starting to see more and more of that. You finally get the materials, you have the labor in place, everything's good, and it's hard to place the insurance. And obviously, the lending institutions will not let the project take place without insurance. So I would say try to get out ahead of this as much as you can. Have these conversations with your underwriters. Make sure they'll write the frame construction for you. And I will say, be prepared for rising rates. We're starting to see it in this frame arena. Population migration. I found this interesting, and we've all heard of this, but now we start thinking about it. So we have more and more people moving to what I call areas that are in harm's way. They move closer to the coast, so we know they're more exposed to tropical systems. We're starting to see people move more into rural areas, building on mountains, building away from the cities, away from the water supplies. So all of these things add up to more risk. And we have to make sure that the builders understand that. They have to give us plenty of lead time. That's the other thing too. You need to sit down and talk to your builders. Let's say a builder's been building in a metro area for years, maybe suburbia right there, protection class 3, and now he's going to do a development that's protection class 9 or 10. We actually see this, and they don't understand where their insurance rates are probably going to double or triple. Their deductibles are going to double or triple, and it's going to be harder to get the coverage to begin with at all. So, I mean, you have to prepare them from that and maybe explain to them that if you build in an area without public water supply, you're going to pay a lot more for your insurance. I'd rather go ahead and have that conversation until they've already started things and they come to you. So we're started this. These are things that we see every day in the builders risk market. So that was kind of a brief overview of what I think is coming in 2022. And I don't, part of this is I don't want to be too pessimistic. The good news is they're building more houses. We just have to understand that where they're building them and how long it's taking and how much it's costing is affecting the whole builder's risk insurance marketplace. And I will say we're here for you. We do this every day, and we would love to help you out in any way we can. So my last slide here before we get into the question and answer period is just once again reminding you about our portal and our flow business, what we're trying to write. And it's very simple. These are some basic information that we need, and up to $1.5 million per structure in coastal areas and up to $3 million in inland areas will flow through our system to quote. And if you like to quote, hit a button and you got a policy. So we have people that do this every day. We do have capacity in these areas. We're presently writing business in 48 states, all of the lower 48. We are readily writing business today, so keep us in mind. And just a few basic pieces of information, and you're off and running. So with further ado, Darcy, let's go to questions.
All right, Jeff, first question. What claim trends are you seeing in builder's risk?
That's a good question because we are seeing some claim trends. So the number one trend that I've been seeing in the last 3 or 4 months is an increase in theft claims. We had a situation in the Dallas Metroplex where we'll call them bandits. I like bandits. So we had these people that were following lumber that was being delivered to job sites, maybe a truss package or the entire lumber package. They would follow it from the building material site to the job site. They would watch it being dropped off, and then they would come back at night and steal the whole lumber package. We're talking about very large claims. They even cut through fences to get to the lumber. This was happening frequently in the Dallas Metroplex. So what the builders decided to do is they timed the delivery of the framing package early in the morning, and then they would actually frame the house that day. So they cut way back on the incidents, the claims. It makes scheduling a little harder. You got to get your labor in place. You got to make sure everything's ready. But the less amount of material you have sitting on the job site unattached, the better off you are. Plus, they're starting to put lights and cameras on all the job sites. That does help a little bit. But that just shows you as the cost of materials go up, these things are worth more and more, and we have to watch those theft claims. That was one thing. We've seen an increase in just overall theft. The copper is kind of coming back, people stealing air conditioning systems to get the copper. We got a claim where they were stealing air conditioning systems off of the top of a commercial building. They had to do that with a crane of some kind, and they got away with it. So theft, I would say, is the number one trend we're seeing. I will say, obviously, the convective windstorms that we're having create a lot of claim situations, so we see more wind claims. It is interesting. The other trend that I think is interesting is on our ground up new construction, the wind doesn't have as bad of an effect. So I think the building codes of today are better than they were, decades ago. We've been seeing that for a while in the coastal areas. The tie downs on the roofs, it's not, the wind is not quite the problem it was. Still a problem. I mean, if a tornado hits the reactor, there isn't much we can do about it. But the idea is, so I would say theft is number one, wind claims number two. We do see a lot of flood claims, and that's another issue. Make sure that you have the proper coverage for all of these perils. Don't assume that everything's covered. They all have different deductibles. They all have different insuring agreements, and just make sure you understand what you're selling. So those are some of the trends I'm seeing, Darcy. What else we got?
All right. Here's a question more specific to your program. Does Victor have any coastal wind guidelines?
Yeah, I mean, we try to simplify things. I always, my father taught me to keep it simple, so that's what I do. So our main guideline is we do not write wind coverage within 1,000 feet of the coast. And we define the coast as the Gulf of Mexico, the Atlantic Ocean. That's pretty much it. Gulf of Mexico, the Atlantic Ocean. So if it's within 1,000 feet of those bodies of water, we will not write the wind. Other than that, we will write the wind. So the best thing is, if you have a question, give us a call. We have an 800 number. I'll show you that in a minute, and we can walk you through it. But other than that, we do write wind in coastal areas. We have certain rates and deductibles that apply, but we are a market for that. Good question.
All right. What are the best ways to determine if the homeowner or the builder need to buy the builder's risk policy?
Well, first question I would ask as an agent is, who is my insured? So if my insured is the builder, I'm going to make very, very sure that the builder is completely taken care of. Builder's risk is probably, I shouldn't say, builder's risk is the best coverage for, of course, the construction, things being built for either the owner or the builder. But a lot of the coverages are built in for the builder, profit coverage and things of that nature, interest of subcontractors might not mean as much to an insured as they do a builder. But now, if I was a builder, what I would sell is the fact that I'm going to handle the insurance. So I would tell the owner that I'm working for, don't worry about it, I've got it covered. But to me, it's almost a selling point for the builder to have it. But then having said that, if I'm an owner and I'm providing the financing, I want to make sure I have proper coverage. So then I would rather have the coverage. So it really doesn't, it doesn't matter to me who the insured is, but you as the agent, I would make sure you take care of your insured, whoever that may be.
All right. And piggybacking off of that question, what if you insure both the builder and the homeowner?
Well, I mean, the easiest thing is to write the policy, and let's say write the policy in the builder's name and add the owner as an additional name insured. So both their interests are protected. That way, in the event of a claim, we don't have an issue. And so that's the number one way I would do it. That's probably it. That's probably it in a nutshell for builder's risk. Just make sure everybody's interest is protected, as far as that goes. Because what happens sometimes is there's building materials delivered to the job site and they get stolen. Well, under some coverages, if they're not attached, they're not covered. If you had written that in the name of an owner and the form did not include interest of subcontractors, those building materials might not be covered. So then you have a problem with that, with certain forms. That would not be the problem in our form because we cover both entities. But I think the easiest thing is just to make sure they're both named on the policy as insureds. Good question.
All right. So when do you typically want the start date for the builder's risk? Is it when they go vertical?
So I guess I haven't asked that question. I haven't had that question in a while. Builder's risk technically starts when anything's being done on the job site. And I could argue when you start clearing a lot, you have labor charges because you got to pay somebody to sit on the grader to grade the lot. So if you're or whatever's happening there. So as soon as the lot's being graded, as soon as the rough plumbing's being put in, as soon as the foundation is going in or the basement's being dug, that's when the start occurs. So that's the easiest thing to do. Some people wait till the framing starts. I would go ahead and do it early in the game. That way we have no issues with any uncovered claims. Good question.
All right. How can you determine depreciation on an existing structure when the depreciation is going to be applied by an adjuster in a claim situation?
Yeah. So what I would suggest, at least in our world, we have an endorsement called a stated amount endorsement. And basically that is an agreement that you arrive with. The agent, the underwriter agrees that this structure is worth this much money. It's $1 million structure. So now we don't have a problem with something happening. We're going to say it's $1 million. We agreed to that. The stated amount is a very good endorsement that I like. And we use it a lot on existing structures. But if you don't, you do have to calculate ACV, replacement cost minus depreciation, and depreciation is an estimate. Frame buildings, we're not talking about historical buildings. That's a whole other aspect of that. We don't do historical buildings in our program. If they're on the registry, that's different. But the typical frame building depreciates 10 or 15% a year as far as the depreciation on that building. So that's pretty much ACV on existing structures. So a 50-year-old building might be worth 50% of the replacement cost, but that's just a good guess. But I think if you work it out with your underwriter and there's notes in the file that you had this discussion or that you submitted the application and said, here's the depreciation, there shouldn't be a problem in a claim situation. I mean, after all, what we're trying to get to is the proper insurance to value. We don't want to overinsure it. We don't want to underinsure it. We're just trying to get to the as accurate as possible. So as always, I'd say the better communication you have with your underwriters, the better off you're going to be if there's ever a claim. So that is something that we all need to get better at, I think, in the insurance business, is proper insurance to value.
All right. Now, what is your frame capacity, and is it per building?
Yes, we can currently go up to 5 million per structure. So I mean, if there's adequate clear space, we can do multiple structures, but it's 5 million per structure. That is our limit now. We can go up to 10 million on masonry non-combustible and fire-resistant structures, and 5 million on frame and joisted masonry.
All right, and so let's do one last question. Should we pad the estimated completion date in case of delays? And what is your recommendation for how much of a buffer to give?
All right, this is just a general rule of thumb. So we know that the average time it takes to build a typical single-family home is probably now in the 9 or 10 month range. So at a minimum, if you're writing single-family structures that are, say, 400,000 and up, the very minimum term is going to be 12 months. If you're going to be building million and up dollar structures, I would definitely go to a minimum of probably 18 months, if not more. Because the higher value, the longer it's going to take, the more chance you have for having, supply chain problems, labor problems, things we're just seeing stretch out. And the last thing you want to do is be stuck with a project at the end and you don't have a market for it. We have agents that approach us every day. They have something that's 90% complete, 2 years into it, and they don't have a market. Nobody wants to write it. That's tough. It's a tough place. I wish I could help them, but I can't write those. So the better deal is to write it in the beginning, a year minimum, and up as the values grow. Good question.
All right, Jeff, and we are at time. So if we did not get to your question, then Jeff or someone on his team will reach out to you following the webinar.
Great, guys. I really appreciate your time today. I think up on the screen we can put the 800 number. Give us a call anytime, 800-944-7472. You can ask for me. I'm here all the time. Give me a call. I'd love to hear from you guys, and let's write some business. Talk to you next month.